Well, greetings and welcome, everyone. This is Unit 3, British American Colonial Life. And in this particular episode, we're going to be looking at sections 1 through 4. That's sections 1 through 4, Unit 3, British American Colonial Life. Now, you see from the date on the screen at the moment, we're looking at about what's going on in the colonies from 1700 to 1764. Specifically, we're looking about what was the average life like in the American colonies. And we're going to be looking at a couple of different roles, different parts of their life. And, we're going to start first with just in general, what's going on with British America. When I say British America, I'm talking about the 13 colonies. And by the early years of the 1700s, all of the British colonies, the 13 colonies, have been established, from Massachusetts in the north and New Hampshire all the way to Georgia in the south. And we're already starting to see a lot of immigration coming into the colonies. And it's not just the English or the Scots-Irish, but also Germans are coming in. These people are looking for a sense of freedom. They're looking for a sense of religious freedom as well, that they can't get back home in the British states. And so we have a lot of Germans coming, especially to the middle colonies. And these guys are going to be fairly well-to-do farmers, and they're going to fit right in with that idea of the middle colonies being a breadbasket. We're also looking at a lot of Irish. Ireland was incredibly poor under the control of the English. The Irish had virtually no rights in their own land. So if they could scrape together enough money, many of them began to come to the colonies, especially the New England colonies. They're going to take any job they can find. It's going to be low-paying manual labor. And in general, in the north, in the New England colonies, we're looking at textile industries. And if you remember from our class discussions, textiles is cloth industry, a lot of fishing going on, especially on the ocean, and of course, lots and lots of lumber and timber industry. In the middle colonies, of course, you should automatically think of that as your breadbasket colony, right? Grain crops, corn, wheat, rye, barley, oats, that are going to be grown to help feed not just the middle colonies, but the other colonies as well. And of course, the southern colonies, what should jump to your mind? But cash crop production, tobacco, rice, sugar. Those are the big ones at the time. Cotton will come along a little bit later. And so we also have fur coming in from all the colonies, including that back country. And fur was as good as gold at the time. And so what we have is that the 13 colonies are, in fact, a very attractive place to settle. And by 1750, British America had the highest standard of living in the world. So that's pretty impressive that these colonies, these dependencies of another country actually have a higher standard of living than the mother country itself. This means birth rates are going to be high. Infant mortality is low. Life expectancy is longer. Average income is a little bit more than what they could expect back in Europe. And so the standard of living is high. And what is going to happen is this is actually going to help spur more and more immigration over time. So having looked at that, and it's all about the land. It's all about the land. And I have always said that this is kind of like part of the American dream. Many of us would like the idea of owning our own property, our own land. It gives us a sense of freedom, a sense of independence, a sense that we can do what we kind of want to do on our own land. Now, obviously, like I've said in class, we can't go out and, kill 20 people or whatever on the property, but you can certainly do your own thing on the land within the law, obviously. And so it's part of this American dream idea. And what that really means is that people are going to come here for that purpose, to give them that freedom, to get that piece of property they can call their own. Because back in Europe, they cannot do that. In Europe, most of the land belongs to one of two entities, one of two bodies, if you will. First of all, it's the king. The king owns the land. He gives it to nobles who rent it out to the commoners. But The commoners owe rent and loyalty to the nobles. The nobles owe rent and loyalty to the king. So you still have to do with what the king says, and it's not really your land. Or it's the church who owns the land. And it's the same thing, whether it's the church or the king. And in England, it's the same thing because the Church of England is headed by the king. You do not own your own property. So this is really a big step to come to the Americas and have the realization that this can be yours. It can be mine. It can be something that belongs specifically to you and no one else. And this land ownership is going to serve a couple of functions. Now, I've listed two on here. I'm going to say there's really three functions. It's that sense of independence and freedom that we just talked about, number one. But it's also a sense of wealth. It is a sense of social rank. How much land you have determines your wealth. And you think about that, people who own an acre, good for them in our society today. People who own 100 acres, they're usually considered a little bit more wealthy. People who own 5,000 acres obviously have more wealth than the person who has 1 acre, or that's the way it seems or appears. And finally, it's political opportunity. And this is really, really, really important. This is part of the freedom aspect, because in most of the colonies, if you own land, you could vote. Land ownership was a required piece to voting. It's also a required piece to holding office. So if you were not a landowner, you did not vote, nor could you hold office. So that's going to be a major issue for people. So this land piece is really huge. And the majority of Americans, about 90%, actually live in rural areas in about 1750. And what I mean by rural is they live in the countryside. Very few people live in the big cities. And in fact, if we look at the biggest cities in North America, or in the American colonies, we see Philadelphia with 30,000, New York with 25,000, Boston with 16. Guys, what is really important for you to understand is our town of Jackson, Missouri has a population of 16,000 in 2020. So the third largest city in the colonies in 1750 is the exact same size as our town. So we're not talking about huge, massive cities, but we are talking about a close city group with several thousand people. But this also means thousands and thousands of others are spread out into the countryside, living their own little rural lives. So you'd have scenes like this: small time farms doing their own thing on their own property, doing what they do, whether it's growing crops, or here in New England, probably doing some sort of livestock farming, in this case, sheep. Sheep produce wool. Wool goes into that textile industry very handily. So this is kind of what we're looking at. Or maybe the middle colonies, they're growing grain crops like the wheat in this picture. And it's a sense of community because people in the whole community come together to help harvest everyone's crop. So it's not just me harvesting my crop, it's all my neighbors. And when we're finished, I'm going to go help them harvest. It's a sense of this community and helpful spirit. So the next little thing we're going to talk about is the role of women. And this is kind of hard for some folks to talk about. And here I have a couple of quick images. The middle image is obviously of a more wealthy woman. Notice the satin and lace dress. The other two women are doing typical household chores. The one on the right, she's washing clothes. The one on the left, she's preparing some sort of meal, perhaps. Looks like she's peeling, I want to call them potatoes or turnips. Someone wants to say that's an onion. That's your call. I don't care. But the quote that always gets me with this particular unit and this particular topic is taken from a woman who wrote this down in the 1700s. Let your dress, your conversation, and the whole business of your life be to please your husband and make him happy. Wow, right? So what does that tell you about women's rights? There are not going to be a whole lot of them, right? Women exist to serve their husband, make him happy. So what could women really do? Well, the answer is not a lot. So let's look at what they could not do. First of all, they can't vote. They can't hold public office. They can't be a minister of any religion at the time. They could not own their own land, only male landowners at the time. They could not work as a professional, so no doctors, lawyers. A lot of people bring up the idea of being a teacher. And this is going to require them to be outside the household in a position of authority, and that's not what the men are going to want. Now, women could teach within their own home, but they certainly couldn't teach in a school. So what could women do? Well, they could run a household, plant a garden, they could work as servants. You're getting the idea here that women's life would not be that glamorous. They're going to be raising children predominantly. Married women or unmarried women had a little bit more of an advantage here. They could enter into a contract. So they could negotiate with someone to turn wool into cloth for X amount of money. But once they married, that contract was controlled by her husband, as was the money. They could own property. But again, once they married, that property legally became that of their husband. And they couldn't have a college degree, so they were restricted from a lot of jobs. So why would these women marry? Well, first of all, in your late 20s, you were considered a old spinster, and this was a lot of societal pressure. You did not want this label, and society is going to really force young women into the idea of marriage because honestly, it's not uncommon to have lots of children. And this was just seen as the typical family of the time. We're talking maybe 10, 12, 15 children. Very, very common, especially in the New England and the middle colonies. Married women are expected above all things to be subordinate to their husband. They are legally bound to obey their husband by law. And men could actually file divorce against women for not listening to him. And so this is a legal thing, not just an social expectation. Leaving the women behind. Education. And really quick, I'm going to say education. We're talking about a very sparse education system. And the easiest way I can explain it is if you start in New England, you're going to have more educational opportunities. In the middle colonies, you're going to have some educational opportunities. In the South, you're going to have fewer educational opportunities. And most colonials could sign their name, and they probably could read based on the Bible. But widespread literacy was not very common. Most education is done in the home. There are few, if any, public schools. And I've already said here, New England had better education than the rest. And the further south you go, the worse it becomes. Now, the interesting thing is, if you're wealthy, no matter where you are in the colonies, you're going to have a better education because wealth is going to buy that education, especially secondary schooling and college. Many people are going to have some sort of education up to the equivalent of about a fifth or sixth grade level. After that was considered secondary, and that's when it really became more expensive. And if we're talking about a college or university, we are talking about a males and for wealthy people only. Universities were typically for the clergy, that is ministers, or for the law. And the University of Pennsylvania was really the first one to not teach religion, but they're going for a modern curriculum of mathematics and foreign languages, the arts, literature, things like that. So not religion, but education is going to be for the privileged few for the most part. And as I said, reading is something that most people can do, especially out of the Bible. And there were very few printing presses in the colonies, although that's going to change in the 1730s. And we're going to see a variety of things start to be published in the colonies. Your typical things that you would expect to see. An almanac, though, is something that was very popular at the time. It contained a yearly calendar. It contained weather predictions, crop predictions, farming advice, poems, jokes, some proverbs about living. And so it was kind of a encyclopedia of knowledge, if you will, in these almanacs. And the other thing that was really popular were captivity narratives. The stories of people, especially women and young children, who had been captured by Native Americans, who had lived with these Native Americans for a period of time and then had managed to come home. And so those were very popular. Back to the almanac. Poor Richard's Almanac was the bestseller in the colonies. Poor Richard was a pen name, a made up name for Ben Franklin. And he's going to become quite the celebrity in the colonies. And there's a copy of Poor Richard's Almanac from 1739. So let's talk about Ben Franklin for just a moment. He is kind of one of the first American celebrities. He's a writer. He's an inventor. He's a statesman, a politician. So he's going to be involved in a lot of different things. And we're probably best aware of him from his experiments with electricity, the key and the kite and the thunderstorm. He didn't discover electricity. He didn't invent electricity. But what he's doing is doing experiments to see how electricity reacts and what it can and cannot do. And so he's probably best known for the kite experiment, but he's going to be celebrated as a very creative genius in the American colonies. In fact, you look at the list of some of the things that he's responsible for. They're very wide-ranging. There's no one thing he did, but he did many things beyond his experiments with electricity. He invented bifocal glasses, the glasses that you see a lot of people wearing, so they can read and see far away at the same time. He's going to be responsible for that. He's responsible for the Franklin stove, a superior, more efficient way of heating and cooking in your home. He created an efficient postal service. You could contract with his offices to get a letter from anywhere in the colonies, and it would be delivered. It would be safely delivered. He established a true library, a lending library. So think about this. Books would be very, very expensive. And he has established a library where you don't have to purchase a book. You can go in and get a book on loan, educate yourself, and then return it. Fire departments. Guys, these people lived in houses of wood. Fire is a huge danger. And so Franklin is going to create a publicly funded fire department from a tax. And people were willing to pay this tax in order to be protected from fire. He invented a lot of other things. He helped establish the University of Pennsylvania. A musical instrument, and my personal favorite, which you can't see down there, he invented swim fins. Can you believe that? Swim fins. So the little flippers on your feet. That's Ben Franklin, guys. So as you can see, this is a wide range of interest that this man is going to have. And in fact, he's going to be asked to be the representative of several of the colonies, not just Pennsylvania, his own colony, to the King of England. So he is actually going to journey to England and be the personal representative of the colonies to the king. And so he's going to talk to the king about what the colonies want or don't want to happen. And so he's got an enormous amount of responsibility for not just Pennsylvania, but 2 or 3 other colonies as well. And so that kind of takes us up to the end of section 4. And when we pick up next, we're going to look at sections 5 and 6. 5 and 6 have some pretty deep messages to them. And I want to take a moment and explain that. So I think we're going to cut this video right here with Ben Franklin, who I'm going to say is a man of the Enlightenment. And we're going to talk about what the Enlightenment was in our next video. Guys, I hope you have a great day. Thank you.